The conversation today, this conversation, suffering. We're studying Jeff Foster's book, The Deepest Acceptance. Did anyone have any suffering this week? You don't have to stand up and say, me, this is what it was about. I was talking with a beloved that is fairly new to the Unity practice and path as far as years, and studying this book, and there was some suffering up this week, some intensity. And I said to this beloved, I said, well, you know, it wouldn't be the beginning of the adventure in Unity if you didn't just align with the conversations that we have and experience that. Have you felt that? Not that it causes it, but we are all connected, are we not? We are all in a sort of kind of cosmic soup where our stuff and the stuff we discuss and what others are experiencing, if we're willing to be vulnerable, open our hearts and share, seem to have similar themes. We seem to go through things together. We don't always learn that if we don't pay attention and if we don't listen and we don't ask, if we don't have conversations. We don't always recognize the meeting point of transformation work. But it's a beautiful thing when we do. So, Unity principles teach us that God is love, God is life, and life is good, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. So why suffering? Why do we suffer then? If it's good and it's amazing, why do we suffer? I was woken up this morning by Georgia. I faked falling asleep again for when she was waking up. I could hear her moving a little bit, and so I faked it and I closed my eyes, and all of a sudden I feel these little lips on my lips going. And that's how she woke me up. Every moment showing up, right? Pure, not in suffering. It's sometimes in life when we get deeper into it, when more time goes by, that we start building up belief systems, ideas, emotions, thoughts, and actions that seem to take us out of that bliss, that seem to take us out of that good, that seem to take us out of that present moment awareness that is peace. So we often ask, why is there suffering? A better question might be how to suffer. How should we suffer? I think of a less talked about snippet from the Gospels of the master teacher on the cross. And a snippet that says something about a laugh for a moment, something about a ha-ha, like kind of an overarching over that, like even this won't take anything away. I am not this. Just a lightness, a knowing of who one is, that one is not the body, that even in the midst of suffering, we can suffer in a different way. So a good question might be, how can we suffer? We can simplify why we suffer. We suffer because of our separation consciousness from wholeness, the idea that we're separate from our source or that we can't somehow reach our source. We suffer because we're not feeling comfort, we're not feeling good. We're suffering because our attachments aren't working with the reality that we're seeing. Our attachments are creating conditioning that hurt us. We're suffering because our expectations, we have them, and life and other people and even ourselves often fall short of those expectations. Jeff Foster says, we all suffer. But either we see suffering as something terrible to be avoided at all costs, or we see it for what it really is, a clear signpost guiding us back home. Let's breathe into that. Do we see suffering as something terrible, something to be avoided at all costs, Or do we see it for what it really is, a clear signpost guiding us back home? Because we can try to lead a life with zero suffering. Has anyone been able to do it yet? You know, the kind of cliche saying is that there's pain, and pain isn't optional, but suffering is optional, because suffering is pain with attachment. So you may experience what you feel is pain in life, but only when we have attachment and expectations does it turn into suffering. But let's just say that part of the human condition, part of the human psyche, is that which experiences suffering. It's written about in sacred text enough to know that it has been passed on to us as a part of the human condition that is naturally experienced. And as far as the outer conditions that create suffering, it doesn't look like they're all going to disappear soon. Right? Not that we can't hope. But it's not looking like we're going to wake up tomorrow and they're all going to be gone, all of the external causes. And we can try to find a pocket or a place or a state or a person to retreat into. But how well does that work? Try it. I think we'll find that everything shows up there with us. We can try to build up the mind and work so hard at our mental ability so that we have no attachment and no expectation. Gurus and yogis, Christed ones, have done this. But if you're not there yet, and you're willing to follow the wisdom that's shared with us this week, the practice invitation is to let go of trying to avoid, transcend, and obliterate the things that are uncomfortable. The things that cause suffering, the feeling of suffering itself, the feeling of pain itself. I shared last week that Jeff Foster said, true spirituality does not strengthen your armor against life, it destroys it. Spirituality, he said, can easily become just another layer of armor. So if we're not looking to build up armor, if we're letting ourselves loosen the grip a little bit on thinking we have to be mental warriors that are incredibly, incredibly strong all the time, is there another possibility? Is it possible that we could decide while we are working on and open to releasing an attachment, releasing ego senses, or finding peaceful retreats, is it possible that in the meantime, we could decide to have peace, to have life, to live? Jeff Foster talks about his experience of the human condition and the suffering self, and he says that he was essentially a walking corpse. Has anyone felt like that at times in their lives? Sometimes you lift that corpse up out of bed in the morning and you walk it all around, and then you put it back to bed at night, hoping it's not going to be there in the morning. Most likely we've all had that experience. When we have that experience, and when that experience gets longer and longer, we start to identify with it. It starts to feel like who we are. And we begin missing what's in front of us. We also begin to unconsciously or consciously be a multiplier of suffering. When we are stuck in suffering, it is hard not to cause suffering for others. It is a great dedication and a great practice of love and worship to the Most High to look into suffering and to have a new relationship with it, a different relationship with it. If This isn't fitting for you if the conversation around pain or suffering isn't something that resonates with you. It's like, what is that? I haven't been there. This still is not irrelevant because you live in a world where you see suffering all around you. And diving into it, learning about the psyche, learning about the spirituality of it, will help grow your inner compassion for the world. It will help you be a beloved for another. It will help you have eyes that heal and hands that embrace and give you a whole different perspective of what you're living in the midst of. You might ask yourself, is it possible to have a different relationship with suffering? Maybe you think your suffering or the suffering of someone you know is so great. How could that be okay? How could they have peace in the midst of it? Well, friends, I think we've all had the experience where we recognize that someone else has it worse than we do. Not only that, someone else has it worse than we do in our mind's eye and is not suffering because of it. Someone else has something that might take us down, take us out, that we might say, never that. And not only are they not suffering because of it, they're peaceful. Or they're happy. Or they're like ridiculously amazing lights of the world. Have you seen that? I mean, take a look around at the miracles. There are things that I have seen that I think I don't even know if I would just stop trying. And it's like they're alchemists. There's a saying in AA that a friend shared with me, our past is our greatest asset. Our past is our greatest asset. What a gift to know that and hear that and affirm that in a recovery community. Not the teaching that our past is our greatest guilt, our past is our greatest sin, our past is our greatest error, our past is our greatest torment, our past is our greatest suffering, but our past is our greatest asset. If that does not resonate yet as true, there is a grand invitation to have a different relationship with suffering. Unity teacher Sig Paulson, one of my greatest beloveds. I told Georgia this morning, it's Grandpa. I showed her a picture of my crumbling book. And I said, look, it's Grandpa, one of her many grandpas. It'll be funny if she's like, he's there. No, just kidding, sorry. There, yeah, Sig. Here we go. The Dawn of Truth by Sig Paulson, Your Greatest Power. Man is an unfinished product, a still growing creature, a God in unfoldment. He lives in a universe whose elements, including his own ignorance, first challenge his spirit, then yield to it. He has come through the ages of bondage, ignorance, superstition, violence, and war of all kinds. He has been a bull in a china shop of creation, yielding fantastic powers destructively in a dark night of preparation to become what he really is, the self-expression of the infinite. He has lived in a hell of separation. Separation from his source, separation from his fellow man, separation from the good every element of his being cries out to experience. He goes on to say, we are coming home to ourselves. We are coming home to ourselves. So what's the problem with suffering? The problem is that it's misery-making. Sometimes we feel like we're a ball in a pinball machine, being banged around, when really we're in a field of false pressures and imagined obstacles, not recognizing that we're putting the pressure on and we're creating the obstacles, not on the outside, on the inside. The outside, let it be what it is. But we imagine, like Jeff Foster says, we imagine a world based on a false idea of who we are. That's the premise of what unity teaches, that we are imagining and creating a world based on a false idea of who we are. We imagine this world and then we live within the confines of it. It's one of the reasons one of my colleagues, Reverend Dr. Michael Bernard Beckwith, says, we're not here to save the world. We're not here to save the world as it is, he says, but we are here to serve an emerging paradigm. The world as it is doesn't need saving. We don't want that the way it is, right? That old mindset, it doesn't need saving. The emerging paradigm is what we want to serve. In unity, we teach that our thoughts are co-creative. So that means, to a degree, we are responsible for our suffering. Does that mean that we're responsible for all of the orchestrations in our life, for everything that happens to us comes our way? It's a big question in unity. You know, in ministerial school, you throw that one around, and it's painful. You know, it goes into all sorts of discussions about, the suffering of a child, the suffering of this and that. Are we responsible for everything in the outer? What we know is that we're responsible for everything in the inner. And when we wake up to that disturbing truth, we yield our true power. Jeff Foster says, what I do see is that many people are seeking. They are trying to escape what they think and feel in the moment. They are deeply resisting the present experience, but they don't realize this is what they are doing. I think in unity, we are especially vulnerable to this piece. I'll read it again. They are trying to escape what they think and feel in the moment. They are deeply resisting present experience, but they don't realize this is what they're doing. Not all the time, but sometimes. He goes on to say, so it feels like suffering is just happening to them, often almost as if it came from outside of them and they are victims of it. If they did realize the extent of the resistance to the moment, they would no longer have to use all sorts of strange theories to explain or justify their suffering. They would no longer blame life, blame themselves, blame others, blame circumstances for their suffering. Maybe even sometimes blame the law of mind action. Ooh. Metaphysical malpractice. They would no longer blame the alignment of the planets or stars, electromagnetic forces or cosmic energies, their karma, their guru, or God, or the devil for their suffering. They would be responsible in the true sense of the word, able to respond to life as it is right now, as opposed to life as they imagine it is or should be. Let's hear that last part. Yeah, it is. It's a clapper. I'll put it in we would be responsible in the true sense of the word, able to respond to life as it is right now, as opposed to life as we imagine it is or it should be. He goes on to say, seeing that nothing outside of ourselves can really cause our suffering is the key to incredible freedom. If you don't believe that, just look at all the different experiences people have and how some are in suffering around things and some are not, right? How relative suffering is. How some can have the most comfort you could ever imagine and then they have suffering, right? And that suffering is no less real because we don't agree with the causes. I have a girlfriend that says champagne problems. Just kind of get you back there. Oh yeah, whatever. Circumstances, he says, can never really cause our suffering. It is always in our response to circumstances that we suffer. It is always in our response to circumstances that we suffer. So he poses the idea that acceptance helps us move through suffering. And by acceptance, he doesn't say passive detachment. He talks about the accepting the truth of this moment, the experience of this moment. And he says it's not sitting back from life doing nothing, but it's entering into a state of allowing. A state of allowing. Because we shut off the light when we're always, as Jeff Foster says, trying to get there. He says we're always trying to get there when here is where all of life is. You could probably read that like 50 times a day and just sit with that line. If it really boggled you and it was irrelevant, just write it down. Maybe at some point it'll be like, always trying to get there when here is where all of life is. Jeff Foster has identified 4 ideas that cause suffering, that create suffering internally. The first is when we're shut off from wholeness. When we're shut off from our own wholeness. The second is when we believe the illusion of future wholeness. I know that can be very disappointing to hear that, especially when you're in present state non-wholeness. You can be like, wait, all I have to look forward to is future wholeness. Well, there is no future, right? There is only now. There's only now. So to be in a state of future wholeness, it's like that little joke of the person that's going on the diet and they write themselves a note before they go to bed and put it on the side table and they say that your diet starts tomorrow. And then they wake up in the morning and read the note and it says your diet starts tomorrow. So it's like, all right, well today might as well have pizza and ice cream because the diet starts tomorrow. The third is the concept that you're a separate person, a separate entity. And the fourth is the idea of controlling, managing, or orchestrating the outer world. It could be managing someone else. It could be orchestrating life. Some people are just masters at that, right? Like, I orchestrate life. And then life doesn't always have tuned instruments. It's flat. They don't know their harmony parts. Out of tune, missing a string. Well, feeling shut off from wholeness, that's the field of emotion, which is a co-creative field. The illusion of future wholeness, that's the field of thought, the creative field. The idea that you're a separate person, that I'm a separate person, that we're all separate selves, separate beings, that's the field of belief, subconscious and conscious, a creative field. The idea that I can control, manage, or orchestrate my outer rather than working on my internal experience, that's the field of action, a co-creative field. So we have emotion, thought, belief, action. He's pretty spot on. The realms of emotion, thought, belief, and action, identifying that and identifying where our suffering's coming from or where we're feeling stuck can be a great asset. It can be a great gift because it's from looking at that we can say, when I go into this state, it's generally from the field of emotion. It's generally because I'm having an emotional experience that doesn't show my wholeness, that doesn't radiate with wholeness. And then I know where to breathe into. Right? If it's the illusion of future wholeness, I'm always going, there's something tomorrow, there's something out there, there's something I'm working towards. Not that it's bad to work towards anything, but I can sit there and go, my thought is keeping me in suffering. The belief, the action, those are portals with which we can see ourselves, which we can see the internal landscape, we can see the mind. Because we know in Unity we teach that we are not here to be stuck in those states. They may be part of the human condition, but Unity truth teaches that we are empowered by understanding, learning about, and diving into our inner domain, which is certainly a different domain than the domain of outer power. In fact, inner power threatens outer power. Because when inner power is developed, outer power has no hope of dominion. Eric Butterworth has the conversation in this way. He says, when you say faith enables you to release a tremendous new potentiality or human resource, it doesn't manufacture it from somewhere. It simply allows you to identify with yourself at a higher level. But that higher level was always present. It didn't suddenly become present because of your faith. When you understand that, then you know that wherever you are, whatever you're experiencing, there's always more in you. There's always more in you. The internal dominion. It's like the psalm I shared last week. If I ascend up to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, thou art there. Let us not focus on the heaven and hell. Let's focus on what's there, what's always here. I want to close with a few excerpts from Jeff Foster. He says that from a place of total alignment with what is, all creative, loving, and intelligent action flows naturally. He goes on to say, from a place of deep acceptance of the way things are, in seeing the inherent perfection of life itself, one is still totally free to do what one is moved to do, to help, to change things, to make a difference. It's just that our actions are no longer coming from the root assumption, hear this, that reality is broken and needs to be fixed. And underneath that, the assumption that each of us is separate from life. Any movement that comes from the assumption that life is broken will simply perpetuate the disease it promises to cure. It's like he's a modern-day Fillmore, really. He goes on to say, awakening is just the beginning for us. A passive attitude, he says, toward life is not possible when you realize you are life itself. Awakening is not the end of engagement with life, it's just the beginning. Paradoxically, when we realize how perfect life is, how everything happens exactly as it should, we are freer than ever to go out into the world and change things for the better. In seeing how perfectly somebody is exactly as they are, you are freer than ever to help them take a look at what they perceive as imperfection. You are no longer coming from the root assumption that they are a broken thing that needs fixing. You see that they are already whole. This is new thought in its prayer practice at the core. All of the mystics, I believe, have known this. I've even heard people say, how did the master teacher heal? And it's because he never saw someone as broken. Why else would you say to someone that's crippled, I mean, I'm getting chills. Why else would you be so cruel to say to someone that's crippled, get up and walk? You have to know deep down, deep down, there is no such thing as being crippled on any level. He goes on to say, you see that they are already whole. And out of the depths of that realization, you point back to their inherent wholeness. Rooted in wholeness, you are free to fully engage with the dance of apparent separation. Will you say that part with me as an affirmation? I'll say it first, then we'll know it together. I am rooted in wholeness. Together? So, rooted in wholeness, I am fully free to fully engage with the dance of apparent separation. He says, perhaps true freedom had nothing to do with being a better wave in the ocean. With perfecting my story of myself, perhaps freedom was all about waking up from the dream that we are separate waves in the first place and embracing all that appears in the ocean of present experience. Perhaps that was my job, my true calling in life, to accept the present experience deeply, to let go of all of the ideas of how this moment should be instead of holding up a false image of myself. He says, in his personal experience, I started to lose interest in pretending to be something I wasn't. I started to lose interest in resisting the present moment. I started to fall in love with the present experience. I discovered the deep acceptance inherent in every thought, every sensation, every feeling, and my suffering came crashing down. I realized that there was nothing wrong with me, and there never had been. And I realized that this was also true for every other human being on the planet. Namaste.